We'll jump to our next speaker who brings a different perspective. So Meghana Keshavan is a journalist at Stat News, which is a healthcare arm of the Boston Globe, something that I actually didn't know before this. And she's been covering the biotech sector for more than a decade, reporting on the intersection of biotech, AI, drug development, and federal health policy, which is something in the US is very active at play for digital mental health. She writes for Stat's Readout newsletter, a daily compendium of the most important technological news in the healthcare sector, including on AI. Her recent coverage includes FDA regulatory process, advances in mental health treatment, psychedelic-assisted research and therapy, and issues affecting the U.S. biopharmaceutical industry. And I think why it's really important to have her perspective is a lot of the things that we're learning in the mental health space about AI and technology are coming from journalists. If we think about, again, what's been labeled as AI psychosis, that's probably not the right term for it. It's well, definitely not the right term. But it was really broken by journalists reporting all these, sharing the stories, helping us understand it. So I think it's important that we see how journalists are approaching the space, thinking about it, and doing it. And poor Meghana, before she joined Stat in 2016, was working at other reporting industries, but also has had to work in wet labs and do all of the fun science stuff, which we won't cover here. So she's covered the whole spectrum, but I'm going to hand it over to you, Meghana, to tell us about your perspective and what you're seeing in this wild world.
Hi, everyone. I'm really glad to be here. My name is Meghana Keshavan, and I'm a biotech reporter at Stat News, the healthcare arm of the Boston Globe. I didn't land at the intersection of AI and mental health because it's my beat or an area of deep expertise. I'm a journalist who covers the biopharmaceutical industry, as John said. I report on gene therapy, oncology, regulatory drama, which we have a lot of these days. And I've done a fair amount of mental health reporting, particularly the psychedelic space, but never really on AI. Um, so what it actually is that about 2 years ago, I accidentally became a case study in a story I might have written. And it's basically what my journalism colleagues are observing and reporting on now. Um, During a period of life when things were very intense, medically, emotionally, logistically, that demanded much more cognitive bandwidth than I had. And I started using generative AI almost daily. It wasn't for an experiment, wasn't for a story. It was just the way regular people do it at 11 p.m. or 1 a.m. or 3:47 a.m. When your therapist is definitely offline, your executive function has clocked out, and you're down to your last functioning synapse. What surprised me wasn't the technology, it was what I was using it for and how many other people were doing the same thing. That became the starting point for this talk. What I want to offer today isn't a data set or a platform or a technical analysis like what we have seen thus far, but it's more of an upstream view, the messy preclinical signals that journalists see before a phenomenon is formalized. Um, One thing I should disclose, my father is Meghana Keshavan, who's a longtime Harvard psychiatry chair and a schizophrenia researcher. Um, so when I began using AI heavily, he became professionally alarmed. He was concerned at how I was interacting with the chatbots. So he asked me a question in a very specific psychiatric way. He said, "What psychological function is this technology serving for you?" His clinical concern, and it was profound, let me tell you, it was, and you know, I had some pretty unscientific explanations to describe this. It shaped how I started looking at this. I'm not a clinician, not presenting clinical conclusions. I'm just an observer with an unusual vantage point. I'm a biotech reporter. I'm a lifelong mental health acolyte by osmosis. And I'm an AI super user who unintentionally stress tested these models more than is probably healthy. The combination has shown me something I think that is worth talking about. So I and my colleagues and people I've spoken to, we are seeing that AI is turning into sort of shadow mental health infrastructure. Here's my argument. AI is functioning as an unrecognized, unmeasured, ad hoc psychological infrastructure, a shadow mental health system people use to stabilize themselves between therapy sessions instead of therapy altogether. I call it shadow because it operates parallel to clinical care. It's unregulated, unmeasured, and largely invisible to the existing mental health system. Yet functionally, it's supporting legions of people in real time. And journalists, not clinicians, seem to be reporting this first. People, by and large, seem to be using AI not for escape, but to think, regulate, cope, narrate, and even delay impulsive action. It's not what AI was necessarily intended to do, but this is how human behavior seems to be playing out. It's about how what people do when traditional support's unavailable or inaccessible. It reflects how humans recruit available tools during moments of cognitive or emotional overload. We have decades of frameworks for digital harm. We have almost none for digital stability, for the ways technology helps people maintain emotional or cognitive balance. And that's a blind spot I actually want to map today. Journalists have been early detectors of emerging psychological and behavioral phenomena for a long time. Take long COVID. My colleagues and I, we were among the first to report on COVID brain fog, and that was months before formal studies came into play. A couple decades ago, there were cutting forums in pro-ANA, the anorexia communities, mapped by reporters before clinicians named them digital self-harm. There was a teen mental health decline from social media that was surfaced by journalists long before federal agencies got involved. Actually, my good friend Deepa Seetharaman was the one who first broke that story for the Wall Street Journal, and it was because she was using Instagram. These patterns come from interviews, reader emails, tip lines, Reddit analyses, and months of conversations with clinicians, ethicists, and users, not from one-off anecdotes. AI use is following the same arc. People describe their AI experiences to journalists long before they bring them to a clinician or a research setting, not because journalists are smarter, although we kind of are, but because people tend to tell us first before language has diagnostic meaning, before experience has a name. Part of what makes these systems feel supportive is something researchers call sycophancy, as you may know, the model's tendency to mirror and affirm, and which users experience less as a bug than as emotional steadiness. That is a user experience. It might not be objective truth. There's a large, mostly hidden, invisible population doing something psychiatry hasn't conceptualized yet, using AI as portable psychological scaffolding during moments of stress. People who can't access therapy, can't afford therapy, can't wait 6 weeks, or don't want to emotionally overload friends. AI is a go-to at this point for many, many people. A JAMA report published last month found that 13.1% of US youths, that's 1 in 8, already turn to generative AI for mental health advice. As for adults, I suspect, again, this is just journalist spidey sense, I suspect that there are more. And eventually, of course, I realized that I was one of them. And it's not because I wanted a robot therapist. I absolutely did not. But it's because AI acted as auxiliary cognition when mine was overloaded. Specifically, I'd use it for pattern recognition in my own behavior. When I was confused about how interpersonal interactions were playing out, particularly around my own responses, I'd describe the interaction and ask, what am I missing here? What pattern am I stuck in? It helped me see my own behavioral loops more clearly and practice different responses. It wasn't therapy, but it was a kind of cognitive mirror that helped me interrupt automatic reactions. And I kept seeing the same pattern in interviews, Reddit posts, conversations with ethicists and researchers, and private messages. It's not just a psychiatric population that's using AI this way. Many are high-functioning adults engaging in compensatory regulation, often adaptive, sometimes avoidant, and occasionally destabilizing. Sometimes they're seeking ways to simply build their own resilience with the help of our handy pocket prefrontal cortex. It looks like a population level phenomenon. I, again, suspect it's not going anywhere. But the research is still pretty scant, and I'm hoping that changes soon. Across accounts, including my own, 6 consistent psychological functions seem to emerge. These are not therapeutic mechanisms, but they're user-recruited functions with recognizable clinical analogs. One is a working memory aid. It's a place, AI can be a place to offload chaotic thoughts into coherent language, like an external RAM buffer when internal bandwidth collapses. One person told me, My mind just spins. I dump everything into the model so I can see a full sentence. It gives me back the version of my thoughts I wish I could produce on my own. Two, it can be an emotion no, regulation buffer. AI doesn't tend to escalate. It has a flat affect and it works as a shock absorber during acute emotional activation. It can work as an impulsivity brake. Like, think of it as a pause button before reacting in conflict. It's a digital equivalent of a therapist saying, journal before you text your ex. Someone else told me before I send a message I might regret, I run it through ChatGPT. It slows me down just enough to think. It can be a narrative organizer. It transforms like a tangled experience into a structured story. There's so many ways you can do that. Narrative coherence has established clinical literature, and AI just provides it instantly. It also offers CBT adjacent self-talk, on-demand cognitive reframing, such as what evidence supports that thought? What else might be true? What would you tell a friend? Some people even take insights or even transcripts from their own personal therapy sessions with their licensed psychologist, and they can upload them into ChatGPT or whatever. And then they are able to internalize things that they struggle to hold on to otherwise through repetition and ask AI to help reinforce or rephrase these insights, a kind of cognitive echo that helps lessons actually stick. And then it works as a mirror to the self. That one surprised me the most. AI is like a reflective surface, as you well know, not because it knows you, but because it synthesizes your own words, your fears, and your values into a coherent portrait that you can actually see. When stress or overload blurs your internal edges, AI reflects back a version of you that feels continuous and recognizable. It may be a funhouse mirror, reflective but distorted, and that line can be dangerously blurry, as journalists have reported. But an AI mirror offers a kind of psychological contouring. People turn to this far more than clinicians realize. Again, this isn't therapy, but it mirrors components of therapy delivered instantly and without judgment. As I compared my experiences with accounts from ethicists and researchers, additional patterns emerged in specific populations. These observations are not clinical findings, they're recurring themes people describe in lived experience. Some adults with ADHD describe AI as outsourced executive function, a structure that helps them sequence tasks, initiate actions, or stay organized in ways they struggle to do unaided. For me, this talk is an example. This is my first ever presentation in a symposium. Otherwise, I've moderated panels, I've, done public speaking in other contexts, but I've never done a PowerPoint presentation to an audience like this one. So AI helped me organize my curious and sometimes messy ADHD brain, like having an editor or a cognitive sounding board on call. Critically, I still wrote this talk. The ideas are mine. And AI just helped me structure them. That distinction matters. Conversations with ethicists also suggest that some people on the autism spectrum appreciate the predictability and logical structure of conversational AI, the lack of ambiguity, the absence of social judgment, and the ability to take things at face value. These compensatory uses likely are not uniform. They seem to differ across cognitive styles in ways we're only beginning to map. But between stabilization and crisis, there's a middle zone psychiatry has no language for yet. Alongside stabilization, journalists are also hearing early dysregulation signals, belief that the AI has a special purpose for them, perceived coded messages, elaborate explanatory systems like this model is training me specifically. It did that to me. Dissociation following extended sessions, paranoia about targeted responses, compulsive use resembling behavioral addiction. To be clear, these are behavioral descriptions journalists are hearing, not diagnoses, and they sit squarely in the hypothesis generation phase of science. Users don't interpret them as psychiatric systems or symptoms. They interpret them as weird AI behavior. So they email journalists, not their clinicians, generally. One AI ethicist told me that she now receives concerning emails weekly, up from monthly just a year ago, from people who have developed elaborate conspiratorial frameworks, coordinated AI-driven cognitive attacks. schizophrenia symptoms caused by AI neuroweapons. Perhaps these individuals already have pre-existing psychiatric vulnerabilities. I don't know. But the frequency matters. AI is becoming a new vehicle for delusional ideation in already vulnerable populations. And we've seen tragic cases, including reports just this week that a man killed his mother and himself after months of delusional conversations with ChatGPT. These reports belong upstream of clinical research during hypothesis formation and not during crisis response. Clinicians have models for digital addiction, parasocial attachment, online self-harm, tech-mediated delusion, but no models for AI-mediated emotional regulation, AI as an ad hoc executive function, AI as a crisis buffer, AI as a narrative organizer, AI as a daily cognitive prosthetic. We don't yet know when this is adaptive, when it's compensatory, when it's avoidant, when it's early dysregulation. One psychiatrist told me that all she knows about AI use really comes from news reports of suicidality, but she has no robust information about how her patients are using it or how it impacts their mental health. We lack language, metrics, and boundaries, and usage is accelerating. This mismatch is pretty unsustainable. Several talks today addressed how to measure, safeguard, or build these systems. My contribution is to surface the human patterns that make that work necessary. If AI is becoming a shadow mental health infrastructure, functioning between therapy sessions or the absence of therapy, then we urgently need phenomenological research to document what people are actually experiencing via qualitative interviews, narrative analysis, digital phenotyping. It's not necessarily what we assume. We need better measurement tools to differentiate adaptive use, dependence, avoidance, and early dysregulation. And we need new attachment and reliance models. What does it mean to rely on something endlessly patient, always available, and incapable of reciprocity? We need transparency from AI companies urgently. We need insight into pattern level interactions, especially in the psychological space between emotion and action. And I think we need journalist clinician collaboration. It should not be siloed. Early user reports should continue to inform clinical hypotheses instead of arriving as late stage crises. I want to end with the question at the center of this talk. What are people actually experiencing when they use AI to think, regulate, or stabilize themselves? It's not what the technology intended necessarily. It's not what safety guidelines predict, but what humans are doing in the wild. Journalists hear the first signals. Clinicians have the tools to study them. Tech companies have the data to contextualize them, and users have the lived experience. AI didn't set out to become mental health scaffolding, but for many people, myself included, that's exactly the role it has started to play. So let's study these patterns now while they're still forming, instead of retrofitting explanations years after the fact. Thank you. And thank you, Dr. Torres, for inviting me to talk.
Thank you so much for sharing with us. And I think it's wonderful one that you explained to us. These could be used for productive purposes too, right? Again, often the narrative said these are only bad, horrible things will happen. There are benefits, and we have to acknowledge that. As you said, we don't really understand how people are using it. But I think the other thing that you help us understand is you have a voice that you may understand more about what people are doing than the clinicians do. You actually may have a larger piece of the puzzle. And I think that with this new era of AI, there's going to be new people coming in to help explain it to us like you. So I think this is hopefully maybe your first speaking appearance, but hopefully not your last one in talking about it. We'll go quickly through some questions, have a little shorter break, but someone said, what's your sense? We know that a lot of these kind of commercial chatbots are not private, they're not protecting your health information. You're putting in some sensitive stuff. How concerned are people really about what they're putting into these chatbots?
It totally varies. And that's kind of why I started thinking about it from like a neurodiversity perspective, because many people are very paranoid about their privacy data leaked. And then there are other people, my little subset of peers included, where you just want to keep scratching the itch because it's so fascinating. So some people will feed anything into the system. And yeah, these tech overlords. I mean, I know a lot of people who cover the AI space from like a business perspective, and it's very financially driven. So there are real privacy concerns, but not every user cares.
Yeah. But I think that's fair to realize. Again, people are going to use them in the ways they want to use them, and we have to understand that with it. If people again, we're not saying anyone should use it for clinical care, but if they're using it, you kind of outline some of the signs when it becomes too much or the patterns become tricky. How do you kind of set boundaries or limits just from what you've seen or with people on it?
I think that there need to be guardrails built into the actual systems because
Yeah.
if someone is spinning into an AI rabbit hole, they might have already the train might be gone, right? Like you there will need to be real regulatory frameworks to bring that back for people because I don't know if users are going to be able to distinguish reality from fiction or whether they have spent 8 hours typing into a chatbot or whatever. It's concerning.
Yeah. No, I think in a lot of the questions in the chat are just people saying, thank you. This is a wonderful new perspective. It's refreshing to hear it. So I want to echo that and just say thank you for, again, bringing this into the conversation.